Hi, everyone. How are you? I hope you're all doing really well. So today I wanted to make a video about Robert Redford. He just died yesterday, September 16th of 2025. And I just thought he was an amazing actor. And I looked up his chart. He always seemed so unpretentious and just like a good person. And so when I looked up his grid and I saw it, I thought I would make a video on it because I wanted to show you a couple of things about him that I think are really neat. And then we'll go over just his dashas really quickly to see why he moved on from this material plane yesterday. And I want to send my deepest condolences to his family and his friends, and I hope he had a good passing out of this material world. So I'm sharing my screen with you now. In case you don't know, Robert Redford was an actor. He was in a lot of great movies. He was in, some of his earlier movies were Jeremiah Johnson, Butch Cassidy, and the Sundance Kid. He did Indecent Proposal. I think that's how a lot of the people from the younger generations found him. He was in Out of Africa. He was great in that. And then my favorite movie actually that he was in was called All Is Lost. I mean, he just said, a handful of words. Most of the movie was just him on a ship. He was lost at sea and he did an amazing job. I mean, it was such a stressful movie to watch. He really made it feel like you were there on the boat with him. And it was a great movie. It is intense, and I won't, give too much away, but it was a really good movie. But I definitely don't think I will ever be, sailing anytime soon after watching that movie. But he was a great actor. So I'm going to show you his Vedic grid so we can learn a little bit about him. And then I'll go into his dashas and his birth chart. I do a lot of grids of famous people because I do think that we can learn from famous people because we see what they are like in public, but what they are like in public is not always how they are behind closed doors, right? I always say the numbers never lie. People can say, that this person's great and that person's great, but the numbers don't lie. And oftentimes they can tell a very different story. So I'm going to show you a little bit about Robert Redford. Okay, so to get his Vedic grid, we'll start with the month of August. That's the eighth month of the year. So we will put an 8 here. And then the 18th, we have to get both the 1 and the 8 into the grid. So there's a 1 here and then another 8 down here. And then because it's a double digit, we have to add the 1 and the 8. That becomes a 9. And then if you recall, we never put the century number into a grid. We just put the last 2 digits, and that's a 3 and a 6. And then we always have to put the destiny number at the end because that is going to be of the utmost importance in seeing someone's personality and making predictions. He is a destiny number of 9. So let's just take a look at him really quickly. So he has a 3, a 1, and 2 9s. And so 1 3 is known as a positive 3, and 1 1 is known as a positive 1. So he was very optimistic. He was a very moral person. And having 1 1 meant that he had a sense of self. He had a strong ego, but he was not egotistical. He did not think he was better than anyone. I have done a video before on how we can see narcissistic traits in someone, and he does not have any of the numbers and the yogas to create someone that has narcissistic traits. So he was optimistic, had a good sense of self, but this 319 yoga right here creates someone that is very much in alignment with what their dharmic mission is. Now, he had 2 9s, so he definitely had a very fiery way about him. And if we go to his birth chart, we can see, so he was born August 18th, 1936 at 8:02 p.m. So we can see from his birth chart that he had the moon and the sun within Leo, as well as Venus and Mercury. So we had these, really big emotions. But when we go back to his grid, it wasn't out of alignment. So, 2 9s can give someone a very fiery way about them, even if it's only in their mind. But because it was coupled with 1 3 and 1 1, he had these big intense emotions, but they were in harmony and he was a good person. Now I'm sure at times, because of these 2 9s, he could become short tempered, even like I said, just fiery in his mind. But what the difference is one of these 9s was a destiny. And so he was a huge humanitarian. So he was on his dharmic path with having a 3 1 9, with neither the 3 nor the 1 afflicted. And he was a great humanitarian. So we would have had a lot of courage. And, I did, because I don't know a lot about him. I just know that, he wasn't in the media a lot. He seemed just, like a very normal, approachable person, not pretentious. So I didn't know a lot about him. But when I saw the 2 9s, I knew right away he was a humanitarian, especially because 1 is a destiny. And I did look him up. And he was a huge environmentalist. He really supported Native American rights and the LGBTQ community. And so that is very apparent because he has 2 9s. Now, a couple of other things, he has 1 6. Having 1 6 is good. Having no 6 can make a person go one of 2 ways. They either don't care about the things of beauty, or they care about the things of beauty and luxury, but it's too regimented. Think of, Venus and Virgo. But having 1 6 is a really good thing in your grid. So he loved people just for who they were. He didn't like people because they had money or because of how they looked. It was the higher form of how he loved and saw the world. So think of it as Venus and Pisces. Now, so we had 2 8s right here. And so there was a lot of hard work in his life, but 2 8s is known as positive 8. So having 1 8 creates challenges where you feel like you're working hard and can't catch a break, but he had 2 8s. And so when he worked hard, he was going to be rewarded. And if we see really quickly back again to his birth chart, he had Saturn right here within Aquarius. And it does do very well in Aquarius because it's in its own sign. But he did work hard. He had a strong work ethic, and people that have 2 8s usually have a lot of money. And that's, probably very apparent because he was a famous actor. He also started the Sundance Film Festival, and then he had also the Sundance magazine. It was more of a higher end catalog with, clothing and home furnishings. And then there were a handful of stores throughout the country. And so he did have, he had a lot of business ventures going. One thing I want to make note of with him is he is missing a 7 here. So there probably were some times in life where he could have felt a little bit adrift because 1 7 will stabilize the grid. However, for him, this wasn't going to be a huge problem. Normally, when you have a 1 and an 8, and especially if it's -1 and -8, it is known as a defamation yoga. So technically, he had a defamation yoga when you have a combination of 1s and 8s. And so, what the defamation yoga does in someone's life, and think about it, is what it means. They are defamed. It can either be because they did something and all eyes were on them in the world, or something was done to them, even if they did nothing wrong, and they basically became famous for something happening to them. So, a lot of I often tell people when they are traveling alone and they have a defamation yoga to not travel alone, especially to a country that is known for being unsafe, because something can happen if you're running a certain dasha. But his defamation yoga was almost non-existent in its operation within his life. The reason is because he has a positive 1, just 1 1, and then the 8s are dominating. We always want Saturn to dominate in a grid. If someone has a sun, a number 1 in their chart, the reason this is because sun is an enemy to Saturn. Right, the sun abandoned Saturn because Saturn was the sun's son and he abandoned him. And so we never want the sun and someone's grid to have more power over Saturn because it creates problems. Long story short, I feel like I'm rambling about this, but it is important for you to know. So what I'm saying is the defamation grid was running at a very low percentage. I did read that he Someone was stalking him at some point, a fan was, and nothing I don't think really came of it, and that is not okay, obviously, but he was not hurt, and that was part of that. Can happen with the defamation yoga, right? But because his one is strong and his eights are in control, the defamation yoga is really negligible in his chart. Okay, so let's take a look at his dashas. I just want to go over a couple of things. So during his number 6 Venus Mahadasha, I do have a video. I'll link it so you can learn how to do this because the Mahadasha cycles are what we use to actually make the predictions. So he got married. His second marriage was in 2009. And if we go into his grid, and we add in right here another number 6, get married for his second marriage during his 6 Venus dasha. And frequently a lot of, it's interesting. There can either be a divorce when you have 2 6s by way of dasha, or there can be a remarriage. You can get married again. And so he did get married during his 6 Venus dasha in 2009, and we see he was running it here. Okay, so then let's look really quickly to see why he died yesterday, which was September 16th. So he was in his Saturn Dasha, which ran from August 18th, 2018 until August 17th, 2026. And so we need to go back to his grid, and we're going to add in another 8, right? Whenever you're running a dasha or an antar dasha, you always add that number in to the grid, and then you analyze from there. So now we can see he has 3 8s, and this is known as -8. So any 8 that is in an even amount of 8s is going to be positive 8. So 2 8s, 4 8s, and oftentimes people with 2 8s or 4 8s are incredibly wealthy, or they will amass wealth at some point in their life. But he was running a triple 8 dasha. This wasn't good. It was causing some problems. And then I don't have this written down, but I did do the calculations. His Antar Dasha that he was running was a number 7 K2 Antar Dasha. I have said before that oftentimes the Antar Dasha can be more important than the Mahadasha, because the Mahadasha is going to last the certain amount of years that the planet represents. So Saturn is 8 years, Mars is 9 years, the sun is 1 year. And so, you're not going to experience something that entire dasha. We have to look to the Antar dasha to pinpoint things. And he was in his number 7 K2 dasha. Now, he was old. He was 89. The Saturn Mahadasha doesn't cause death, because as long as we live to be 45 years of age, we are going to go through an entire set of dashas of all the planets, 1 through 9. But if you are old, in old age, and you're going through your second Saturn dasha that's coming up, there oftentimes can be a loss of life at this point. But again, you have to look at everything, because people can die during their Jupiter or their Venus dasha. But he did die during the Saturn Mahadasha and then the K2 Antar dasha. So let's go to the birth charts to see why that was. And we'll go over his birth chart a little bit too, because he has a nice birth chart. I just think he was a really nice person. So his ascendant was in Pisces in Uttara Bhadrapada Nakshatra. So that is ruled by Saturn. And so because it's ruled by Saturn, and and Saturn is 12 places away, right? The ruler of Pisces is Jupiter, but the ruler of Uttara Bhadrapada is Saturn. It's 12 places away. And so he was not a materialistic person, right? There was, even if he didn't actively practice spirituality, his soul was not attached to this material plane. And we can see that from his grid as well, right? When someone has a 2, an 8, and a 4 in their grid all the way across, they are very attached in this material world. It doesn't have to be in a bad way. They are just fulfilling karma in this material life. So with Robert, and recall, this was just the dasha he's running. He normally has 2 8s. He did his karma, because Saturn is the planet of karma and hard work. He did his karma, but he wasn't attached to things, right? Remember, he's a humanitarian. he wasn't attached. Having multiple threes, fours, even multiple twos can create a lot of attachment to this material realm. He wasn't attached, and we can see that, right? Because Pisces is the last sign in the Kalpurush, and that's his ascendant Uttara Bhadrapada. And interestingly enough, he did die in the mountains. I mean, he was at his home in Sundance, but Uttara Bhadrapada has a lot to do with the forests and the mountains, and that would explain why he loved going to Utah so much. And I do believe, I'm not sure of the quote, so I won't try to quote it. I'll just summarize, but he did say something to the effect that he liked to get out of LA because it was just really superficial. And that would make sense because people with their ascendants in Pisces typically are not superficial at all. I mean, it's the least superficial sign, and this is his way of being. It's setting up his whole chart. So a couple of other things we need to see where Saturn is, that's the ruler of his Mahadasha. It's in Aquarius, right? And so there is a very good chance, I don't have his medical history, but when he ran his last Saturn Dasha, there could have been some medical problems. It is doing well in Aquarius, though. So remember, we also have to look and see where transiting Saturn was, because he's running a Saturn Mahadasha. It's really important that we see where that Mahadasha planet is transiting. It was transiting right here through Pisces on September 16th at 4 degrees of Pisces, and his ascendant was at 6 degrees. Let me double check that. Yes, his ascendant was at 6 degrees. And so Saturn can bring wisdom, but transiting over your ascendant, right? If the dasha is running, it can bring endings, right? And it did do that for him. Now, we also need to see where K2 is transiting as well, because remember, he was in his K2 Antardasha. That's going to be very important. So K2 transiting, so his K2 is in Ardra Nakshatra. So that's important too, right? Within his fourth house. The reason this is important is because it's an Ardra Nakshatra. Ardra is destruction. And so we have to look at the natal K2 in Ardra. That's not great. And then there was also the transiting K2, which was in Leo, and it was transiting at 23 degrees of Purva Falguni, and then his moon was at 26 degrees of Leo. So yeah, transiting K2 was going over the moon. And what does K2 do to the sun and the moon? Causes the eclipses. So you can see why this happened to him yesterday. Now I do, it seems sad, but I do take comfort in knowing that he had a long life, because I think he had a lot to give. Okay, a couple of other things I wanted to point out in his chart is that he did have Rahu in the 10th house. Rahu in the 10th house frequently, if other things in the birth chart support that, will make someone famous. And then I also wanted to point out his Jupiter is in his 9th house. And this is, Jupiter's home is the 9th house, right? Sagittarius is the 9th house. And so what I'm most intrigued by, though, is the aspects Jupiter has. So Jupiter's 5th aspect is on his 1st house, on his ascendant. And so there would have been, a very childlike curiosity about him his entire life. It also would bring in optimism to him in his life. And then Jupiter's 9th aspect is going to fall on Cancer. Now, he does have Mars in his 5th house in Cancer. Mars is debilitated in Cancer, but the reason that things were okay for Robert Redford is because Leo rules the 5th house, right, of creativity. He was very creative. Mars was in Pushya, so he would have been a caregiver. And with Jupiter's 9th aspect on his 5th house, the 5th house is the house of Purva Punya, past life good deeds, and bring in luck. And what's making this aspect so strong is that Jupiter is aspecting Mars with its 9th aspect. Jupiter and Mars are friends. And so it's bringing in, this, it's like a gift from the heavens for him in his material life here. His speculative gains would have been very strong. It brought in a lot of creativity. It shows why he was so good at acting. And then there would have been some luck from the heavens coming into his life. And so I just think that that aspect is really nice. So remember, Saturn was transiting in Pisces at the time that he died, but it was retrograde. Okay. And I find this so interesting. It's going, when a planet's retrograde, it's incredibly powerful. It's trying to get back to the last sign, the previous sign, to gain knowledge and wisdom to move forward. And, it's going to be retrograde for a little over 2 more months. I think it goes direct. I think it's November 28th, somewhere around there. But it's interesting because Saturn is represented by the number 8 within numerology. He's running his 8 dasha. Saturn's on his ascendant going back towards the 12th house, and his natal Saturn is there. And so I take this as, I just think it's so interesting that he died during Saturn retrograde. One quick thing that I want to show you before I move on is he had Jupiter and Saturn square to one another. And so what I think was going on is that, I don't know the state that he was in right before he left this world, but I think that he was coming to terms, his soul was, with what was happening, and going back. He's going back towards spirituality and the other dimension. And what I think that his soul was doing was trying to achieve moksha. And, we don't know when any of our last lives will be. I know a lot of astrologers say K2 in the 12th house in your natal chart is your last life, or your, towards the end of your last lives. I do think that has some validity. I also think people that have their ascendants within Pisces or their moon in Pisces, this can also, have a lot of validity. But I think at least in this life, the soul was wanting to do that, to really achieve something higher. Now, we don't know, what will happen with that. Only he and God know that. But I do think that that's what happened when he died during Saturn retrograde. I think there was something much higher to that. Now, the last thing that I want to mention about his chart is that Jupiter was transiting at the time of his death through his 4th house in Gemini, and it was conjunct K2. Now, remember, his K2 was in Ardra, but Jupiter at that point had moved into Purnavasu. Jupiter doesn't do well in Gemini because Jupiter and Mercury are not friends. However, Jupiter does okay in Purnavasu because, if you recall, Purnavasu runs into Cancer, and Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. And so Jupiter in his 4th house, I don't mind Jupiter and K2 being together, but Jupiter was activating his natal K2. It's in Ardra. K2 is endings, it's moksha, it's loss. But that explains why he died at home in his sleep, because Jupiter in the 4th house does well, right? Cancer is its home. And so it does well in the 4th house. And that would explain why he did have, he just went to the next dimension. And then one more thing, I can't remember if I mentioned this, but if you recall, this Jupiter's 9th aspect on his 5th house, that is being aspected. That aspect is really strong because Jupiter is exalted within Cancer. And so it was, the 9th aspect on his 5th house exalted. And so it's a nice chart. So I think that that's all I'll show today about Robert Redford's birth chart and Vedic grid. I wish him all the best and his soul's passing to the next dimension. Please let me know if you have any questions. I'll be happy to answer them. I just want to share the wisdom of Vedic numerology that I know with you so that you can learn how to create your own grid and learn what dashas are coming up for you and those in your life so you can live, the most peaceful, harmonious life on this material plane as possible. If you haven't yet done so, please subscribe to my channel so you never miss another video. And if you're interested in booking a consultation with me, you can click the link in my bio or reach me at brooknumerology.com. I'll see you for the next video, friends. Bye.